On December 22, 2008, a well-known French investor, Thierry Magon de la Villouche, entered his office on the 22nd floor of a building in Manhattan, New York. He locked himself inside, sat in his chair with his legs resting on the desk, consumed sleeping pills, and ended his life. Thierry was 65 years old when he took this tragic step, just 11 days after the arrest of Bernard Madoff, an American fraudster whose actions caused him losses of up to $1.4 billion. Madoff was infamous for persuading people to entrust him with their money under the promise of high returns through investments. In reality, he simply redistributed a portion of the incoming funds to earlier investors, creating the illusion of profit and fueling greed, among others. Often regarded as one of the most cunning fraudsters in history, Madoff masterminded a scheme that remained undetected for nearly 4 decades. When the truth finally surfaced in 2008, investors, including Thierry, suffered collective losses exceeding $50 billion. These devastating losses drove some, including Madoff's son, to take their own lives. How did Madoff earn his title as the smartest con artist in history? What tactics did he use to deceive so many? How was his fraud uncovered, and why did his sons report him? All of these questions unravel in the following story. Bernard Madoff, who orchestrated the largest Ponzi scheme in history, eventually broke his silence. The man behind this notorious operation spoke out from prison, where he was serving a 150-year sentence. This marked the end of a financial empire built entirely on deceit. In the late 1960s, an American businessman named Stanley Chase sold his share in a family-owned clothing manufacturing company on the East Coast and retired. Looking for someone to grow his wealth, Chase turned to his college friend Marty Gold, who was well-versed in the stock market. In 1970, Gold introduced Chase to Bernard Lawrence Madoff, a brilliant young entrepreneur who, at just 32, owned a brokerage firm called Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, founded in 1960. Chase was impressed by the substantial returns Madoff promised to his investors. But how did Madoff achieve such remarkable profits? According to Madoff, his success lay in a stock market strategy called arbitrage. This explanation convinced investors for more than 40 years. However, the real answer emerged only after his arrest. Madoff was running a fraudulent operation based on the infamous Ponzi scheme, named after Charles Ponzi, who first implemented the concept. The scheme was simple, yet highly deceptive. Madoff lured investors with the promise of extraordinary returns, but merely deposited their money into his personal accounts. He then used funds from newer investors to pay returns to earlier ones, creating an illusion of profitability. Chase, completely swayed by Madoff's results, entrusted him with part of his wealth. Madoff promised returns as high as 14% annually, which encouraged Chase to involve his 3 sons and eventually open over 40 accounts with Madoff. In 1970, Chase founded Lambeth Company, a feeder fund designed to pool money from investors and channel it to larger funds like Madoff's. Chase earned commissions for managing these investments. Confident in Madoff's abilities, he later established 2 additional feeder funds in the 1970s. Chase was not Madoff's only source of capital. Around the same time, Carl Shapiro, a wealthy American businessman, sought an investment strategy involving arbitrage. Referred to Madoff by a mutual acquaintance, Shapiro first invested a small amount before entrusting him with larger sums. Their partnership lasted nearly 40 years until Madoff's arrest. Madoff's reputation as an exceptional money manager began to attract more prominent figures, including real estate mogul Norman F. Levy. Even major banks, such as J.P. Morgan, trusted Madoff indirectly due to his association with Levy. Madoff's steady annual returns of 10 to 14% were extraordinary in an unpredictable market, yet few dared to question their legitimacy. Despite skepticism in some quarters, Madoff thrived largely because he never solicited investments. Instead, people sought him out, convinced by word-of-mouth endorsements and his seemingly impeccable track record. By the mid-1980s, technological advancements like computerization reshaped the investment landscape, making it harder for Madoff to justify arbitrage as the source of his returns. In response, he adopted a new facade, a split-strike conversion strategy. This sophisticated-sounding trading method was nothing more than a cover for his fraudulent activities. The actual profits distributed to investors were simply funds recycled from new investments. In 1999, a critical turning point occurred. Frank Casey, an associate at Rampart Asset Management, contacted a skilled analyst named Harry Markopoulos to investigate Madoff's strategy after hearing about his consistent monthly returns of 1 to 2%. Markopoulos, along with two colleagues, scrutinized Madoff's financial data and discovered numerous inconsistencies. They concluded that Madoff was operating a Ponzi scheme. Markopoulos submitted an 8-page report detailing his findings to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, in 2000. Shockingly, the SEC dismissed the report, failing to act on the allegations. The scheme continued uninterrupted until the 2008 global financial crisis triggered widespread panic among investors. Facing massive withdrawal requests totaling billions of dollars, Madoff could no longer sustain his operation. On December 10, 2008, Madoff confessed to his sons, Mark and Andrew, that his entire business was a fraud and that investor losses could reach $50 billion. Horrified, they reported him to authorities. The following day, Madoff was arrested. In June 2009, he received a 150-year prison sentence. The fallout was devastating. His eldest son, Mark, died by suicide 2 years later, and his younger son, Andrew, succumbed to cancer in 2014. Madoff himself passed away in prison in 2021 after serving nearly 11 years.